Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML.
News Talk 1270 KIML, Don Carpenter Show. Welcome back to the program. And in studio with us, I'd like to welcome House Speaker Tom Lubnau. Thanks for joining us this morning.
It's good to be with you again, Don.
Yeah, it's been a while. So what have you been up to?
Well, yesterday was an interesting day. In the morning, I spent a few hours on the phone with the Energy Producing States Coalition. That's a group of states. It's a coalition that started in Wyoming, where we figured that nobody would listen to our one representative in Congress and 2 senators, but if we could get together with 10 or 12 or 13 other states and communicate a unified message to Congress from all of those energy-producing states, then maybe folks would listen. And now we've got 13 members in the coalition, and we worked real hard along with all of those congressional delegations to get our federal mineral royalties back from the sequester, which resulted in about $54 million coming back to Wyoming. We also are working now on some issues on development of Alaskan oil, because we've got about 50 billion with a B proven barrels of oil on the north slope of Alaska that they're not allowed to drill for. And they've got the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, they call it TAPS in Alaska, is the pipeline that goes from the North Slope to Valdez, Alaska. And it requires a certain volume of oil to go through or else it freezes. And the Lieutenant Governor of Alaska said, if it freezes, we're going to be the proud owner of the world's longest chapstick.
Oh, jeez.
And then when it freezes, they have to reclaim it because that's part of the original deal with Congress. And so then all of that oil is stranded there. Well, so drilling up on the north slope of Alaska is important to the Alaskans, and we're working on that issue. It's also important to our domestic security because if we're producing oil in Alaska, we're not shipping money overseas to people who don't necessarily like us. And Alaska worked real hard on getting the sequestered money back for us, and they didn't receive a large portion of that. But because we work together on things that aren't necessarily in each individual state's interest, we avoid a divide and conquer strategy by the administration, and it's been working pretty well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the great things about this legislature here. I mean, I was telling you before the show, last week I had Representative Throne in, and everybody's kind of working together. We're all on the same page, at least in this state, as far as trying to get our energy production up. So who knows? Maybe one of these days we'll wake somebody up.
Well, and Representative Throne, of course, born and raised in Campbell County. They've got a family ranch 20 miles south of town. There's nobody who understands mineral production better than Representative Throne, and it's a good voice with the Democratic Party to go, now look, those guys know what they're talking about, slow down.
Well, I think we might be starting to kind of budge the needle a little bit. I mean, we see, they're fairly prominent Democrats in Congress starting to kind of see the light. I mean, Senator Manchin from West Virginia. Of course, West Virginia is a big coal state, and they're almost in the same boat we are, where coal is their biggest deal. So maybe one of these days we'll see where we'll actually be able to, drill on our own land.
Well, and I met yesterday afternoon with Forbes magazine. They're in running a story on what they think the future of coal will be. And so I spent the afternoon talking about the future of coal. And if you look right now, the Chinese own, between $8 and $12 billion of our national debt. And one of these days, they're going to say, all right, it's time for you to pay back. And the question is, what is it that we have that they want? And after coal and oil and gas and wheat, the list gets pretty short because all of our TVs, it's hard to find a product that doesn't have a made in China label on it.
Yeah, and we've been blessed with such vast mineral reserves that it's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Well, it is, and We talked, and things that maybe these folks hadn't thought about. You won't give up your heating, you won't give up your air conditioning, you won't give up your refrigeration, you won't give up your hospitals, you won't give up your water treatment. All of those things are electricity driven. And there's 3 billion people who are in the world who are totally energy destitute, and there's about 5 billion out of the 7 billion people on the planet who are in what they call energy poverty, where they don't have the power that they need to meet their daily lives, the needs of their daily lives. And so I've always maintained, and I think there's a lot of scientific evidence to prove it, that it's going to take more energy usage, not less energy usage, to clean up the environment, and that energy usage is a good thing, because if you graph energy usage with infant mortality or standard of living or lifespan, what you find is the more energy you use, the better your life is. And so those people who are in energy poverty are going to become more and more economically powerful as they come out of being third world countries, and they're going to demand energy. And where are they going to get it? Well, in the short term, coal is the cheap and available resource.
Yeah, and it's not like it's not dirty like it used to be either. And meanwhile, and this news just came out this week, shutting down 2 coal-fired plants right here in Campbell County. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, we've paid for this infrastructure. And so when we shift to a whole different kind of infrastructure, we've got billions and billions of dollars that we need to respend, building new power plants, connecting the new power plants, building backup power plants to the wind power plants. And so, and we're not going to make much more hydroelectric power. The places that are developed for hydroelectricity have been developed. They were in the 30s and 40s, and there'll be a little more, but we'll also have to start taking some of those dams offline because they're going to be silted in, and they're not going to be as productive as they were before. And so the long-term energy strategy favors coal until there's some sort of technological development. Now, if somebody figures out cold fusion in the next couple years, then coal will have a problem, but that isn't likely.
Well, we have a little bit of uranium, so we might still be all right if cold fusion comes around one of these days.
Well, yeah, that's true. We have a lot of uranium, sitting on one of the world's largest reserves here just south of town, and uranium mining is picking up. Because of the United States tax laws, it's interesting, it's Canadian and Russian companies who are mining the uranium. If the United States would change their tax laws, then those people are primarily American investors working through Canadian and Russian shells.
It's I guess it's just a never-ending battle, isn't it?
Well, we have to look at ourselves as working in a world economy. It's different than the energy crisis of the 70s, where the only people who were competing with energy were the Japanese and the Europeans. We've got a world that's demanding energy now, and so even though domestic oil production is at the highest level it's been since the 70s in the United States, our oil prices are high, and the reason our oil prices are high is because there's demand for oil in the rest of the world. And so our gasoline prices are driven primarily by a world market and the price of oil, and not domestic. Now, gas, because we don't have transportation, ubiquitous transportation all over the world, is harder to ship. And so there's price differentials, say, between Europe and the United States, where gas in Europe is selling for, I think, $12 an MCF. And in the United States right now, I don't know, I didn't check this week, $3.50 or $4 an MCF.
So, and that's, I think that's probably something that eventually will kind of even out as well once we figure out ways to ship it a little bit easier.
Well,
you have to build those big LNG ships, I'd imagine.
Well, and 8 years ago, we were talking about how are we going to import gas into this nation, and because of the technological advances in hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, we've now opened up nearly unlimited gas reserves. And we've seen a shift in world energy power because of the new technology in drilling for oil and drilling for gas. And you see one of the largest industrial developments in the nation in southern Campbell County and northern Converse County with the horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing that's going on down there.
Oh yeah, and I've driven down through the southern part of the county twice in the last week, and it's nothing but horizontal drilling fields now.
Oh yeah, it's amazing that what the technology's done. It's revitalized an industry that was in a decline curve. And if you look at the oil production curves, if you probably weren't around in the 1970s, but I was, and
part of it. I don't remember it, but I was around.
They told us in the 1970s that we'd be out of oil by 1990, and although we haven't discovered many more reserves, our technology has advanced the curve on those reserves that we can recover. And a good example is the Teapot Dome oil field down by Midwest, famous from the Teapot Dome scandal in the 20s. They, by injecting carbon dioxide into the field, they think they can get another 20% of the oil that's underground, that's locked underground, out of that field. And that field's produced, I think, since the turn of the last century, since the late 1890s. It's over 100 million barrels of oil.
Wow. And I knew about that scandal, and I had no idea it was that close. I knew it was somewhere out in the west, but I didn't know it was within, 60 miles from here?
Oh, it's a little further than that, 80 miles.
Yeah, but it's, wow. We're right in the middle of history.
We're right in the middle of an amazing amount of history, and sometime when I'm not a politician, I'll come and talk about local history, because that's one of the passions I have, and we are right in the middle of a lot of the history from the 1860s and 1870s, the soldier and Indian wars. Of course, you have the Johnson County War just west of here in Johnson County, and the barn where that war ended is still standing, and you can go and tour the barn and look at the bullet holes where the regulators, who were the large cattlemen, came up from southern part of the state, I think mostly from Texas, and they ended up holed up and were laid siege to by the citizens of Buffalo, who were just about to come and finish the deal when the United States Army came and saved the regulators from slaughter in that barn at the TA Ranch.
Well, I had no idea. Maybe we'll have to set that up sometime. You can come in and give us a little bit of a history lesson. How about this? Let's take a break, and we'll come back and we'll maybe talk about some of the other things that the legislature's been up to. And I know you have quite a few things that you'd like to address, so we'll get around to everything today.
Okay.
So stay tuned. News Talk 1270 KIML.
Broadcasting from two tall towers in the middle of a big field.
Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML. Call Don now, 682-1270. News Talk 1270 KIML.
News Talk 1270 KIML. Don Carpenter Show. And welcome back to the program. And during the break, actually, Paul mentioned something. He stopped by the studio, and just give us a little bit of an update on what happened with the proposed beer tax.
Proposed beer tax died. Wyoming has the lowest beer tax in the nation at 2 cents a gallon. It hasn't been changed since Prohibition, and we're not going to change it. Yeah,
well, there you go. And I know I don't drink a lot of beer, but that kind of interested me that it was only 2 cents a gallon. So. Now, how does that compare to other states?
Even if we quadrupled it or quintupled it, we'd still have the lowest beer tax in the nation.
And it's still not going to change.
And it's not going to change.
There you go. So hopefully that's the end of that discussion.
Senator Peterson from Lovell wanted to add an additional 2 cents to the beer tax to pay for rehabilitation and treatment of people with chemical dependency, primarily from beer.
Well, would that have even been enough, though, to tell you the truth?
Wyoming spends more on mental health and substance abuse per capita than just about any state in the nation. on a per capita basis.
Okay, well, just so we don't have anybody thinking we're not going to take calls, let's take one and see what happens. News Talk 1270, you're on the air.
Morning, Tom.
Good morning. Oh,
Morning.
Morning, both of you.
Okay, good morning.
Okay. Say, on this beer tax, how is that affecting the microbrewers? Is that going to change any, do they still have their regulations and everything like we was reading about, or how is that working?
The rules and regulations aren't going to change. The beer tax isn't going to change at all. We're not going to change anything. It's going to be the same liquor laws as far as I know. Of course, anybody can bring a bill this legislative session. Because it's a budget session, it has to get 2/3 majority to get in. And since it didn't make it past the Revenue Committee, it's not likely it's going to make it past the Revenue Committee again, even if it were introduced. But I don't see any tax increase bills being introduced or making it through the next legislative session, which starts next February.
Well, that's good. How do you personally stand on raising the beer tax?
I'm against it.
Good. Thank you.
Hey, see, it was that simple. And so, I mean, it died in committee, and they might try to bring it again, but it doesn't look like it'll get passed.
No, I don't think so.
I think it's pretty safe to say it's pretty tough to raise taxes in Wyoming unless there's a really good reason. Like the gas tax, where we were paying it anyway, and it didn't affect the gas prices. So,
gas prices were lower. It's hard to figure out, and we're trying to do a study to see if there was any effect. We don't think there has been an effect, but we're trying to study that to make sure that we were right. What we do know is we're able to keep our roads safe. And 10 years ago when I first ran, we didn't have passing lanes on Highway 59, and Highway 59 was 2-lane down to the Bishop Road. And that was a real issue, was making sure that Highway 59 was safe for coal miners driving to and from work every day. And first we added the passing lanes because we had the money available to do that. And that helped a little. Making it 4-lane down to the Bishop Road helped a little. And you're probably too young to remember them building the interstate, but when I was a little boy, we didn't have interstate through Gillette, and then they opened the interstate from Gillette to Buffalo. Otherwise, you had to go through Claremont and Ucross to get to Buffalo. And then there was a stretch of 2-lane road all the way to Rosette, and then from Rosette to Moorcroft, it was interstate, and we just built it in stages. That's our plan with Highway 59. The Highway Department's plan, as I understand it, is to make it 4-lane from the turnoff at Highway 450 and 59 into Wright, and then start connecting those sections so it's 4-lane all the way from Douglas to Gillette eventually. But that's a long-term project, and we have to have a long-term view, and having the kind of money to maintain our highways and allow us to expand our other existing highways is important to the infrastructure in our state.
Right, and the gas tax was only for maintaining roads, but it also frees up other monies that could be used to expand.
That's correct.
Okay, so I mean, it's not the end of the world. I mean, but like I said, if there's a good reason, there's no problem with it. But like on the beer tax, wasn't really a good reason, and it died as it probably should have.
The gas tax is a user tax, and 60% of that's paid by people from out of state. I think it's like 62 or 52. I can't remember the exact number. But most of that tax is paid by people from out of state who are using our roads going through the state. And so it's a true user per mile tax. The federal government is looking at, because cars are getting more and more efficient, and something I'm opposed to, putting a little mileage meter in your car and measuring the number of miles that you drive and charging you a per mile tax, because they're not getting as much gas tax revenue as they were, because cars are becoming more and more efficient. And it's a silly thing, and we're opposing it, but they're testing it in Minnesota and Oregon right now.
And, well, I think that one will probably see a lot of resistance around here. And yeah, I mean, you said you're against it, so I don't know anybody that lives in this area that would be for having their little black box in the car. But let's try taking another call. News Talk 1270, you're on the air.
Hey, question for Mr. Lubnau.
Yes.
Mr. Lubnau, Mr. Speaker, would you be willing to release the ratio of the IFTA money versus the local money as it pertains to the gas tax revenues next July 1st when the tax is a year old?
Sure. And as a matter of fact, if you go to the Department of Transportation website, all of that information is available right now for the past stuff. But next June at the end of the fiscal year, certainly we'd be glad to release it and put it up on the website. We try to be as transparent as possible.
Don't you agree that this would be an easier sell for those of us who aren't too thrilled with taxes if we can prove that interstate traffic pays more?
Oh, sure. I'd be glad to put that up.
Thank you.
Okay, there you go. And you mentioned transparency, and I guess that's probably a good segue into, I guess, the main reason you're here. And we've had a lot of people calling and asking, where they can find the report about the investigation, the full 1,500-page report for the investigation into the superintendent, public instruction. And we've had a few calls about that, and that is publicly available, right? The report that everybody's been talking about.
Most of it is publicly available. And if you go to the Department of Audit website, we have the state auditor. We organized the Department of Audit not unlike the same way that we reorganized the Superintendent of Public Instruction's office last session, but we did the Department of Audit in the late 1990s. And so we have two departments. We have the state auditor, which is Cindy Cloud, and then we have the Department of Audit. And if you go to the State of Wyoming Department of Audit website, and then there's a little link that says public funds and then state agencies under the public funds, the full 1,500-page report is there. Now, there's parts about personnel information dealing with information regarding individual people's personnel files and individual people's medical information that's been redacted out of that report. But the bulk of the information and all of the reports and all of the statements of all of the state employees to Kathy McPherson are all there for everybody to read. And it's a long read, but it's really, really interesting.
Yeah, and I know, I think maybe a lot of people had a misconception that some of the redacted parts were stuff that people, are trying to hide something. But this is more, with medical records, that's HIPAA stuff. I mean, you can't release that. I mean, that's by law, you can't release that.
By law, we can't release personnel files. So if you were a state employee, we couldn't release Don Carpenter's personnel file.
Well, that's a relief.
and the contents of your personnel file or any other state employee's personnel file. So those are the kind of things that are redacted out of the report. But the bulk and the substance of what happened, and you have to understand the history. Let me begin by dispelling that this investigative committee's a personal vendetta by certain very powerful members of the legislature. What happened, and it started back in the summer and fall of last year, was legislators, including me, started getting phone calls from concerned state employees saying that funds were being diverted from where the federal grants required them to be spent. And we said, well, you need to come public with this. And they said, well, we can't. And the reason we can't is because we can be fired and we need our jobs. And we have what we think is an atmosphere of intimidation at the Department of Education, where if you say anything poorly against the superintendent, you get fired. And so we passed a bill last session, House Bill 221, which has received exactly no press or no discussion, that fixed a loophole in our state statutes where if you were a state employee, other state employees could complain about illegal activities, and if it wasn't done maliciously and it wasn't done falsely, you got whistleblower protection. But it didn't extend to elected officials. And so what we did is we passed this House Bill 221, which made it possible to report, and if it was true, illegal conduct by elected officials, and then you'd still have whistleblower protection and your job would be protected. So we passed that last legislative session, and then all of these people were willing to come forward and talk to Mrs. McPherson. And so they did, and that's what the essence of the McPherson report is all of these people talking and telling Mrs. McPherson what they believed was happening illegally in the state Department of Education. Well, so that report was released in late June, and the legislators read the summary report and then the 1,500 pages of backup material. And so the investigative committee was only comprised after 42 of the 60 members of the House of Representatives requested that the committee be impaneled. And I see you've got a flashing light.
Yeah, let's take a call, and we're almost up against a break, so we'll take a call and then we'll take a break and we'll come back and get into this a little bit more. News Talk 1270, you're on the air. Well, I guess I should hit the button. News Talk 1270, you're on the air.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious. What are you guys doing about all these illegal Mexicans up here? Do you guys care that they're stealing all our jobs?
I'm not sure what that has to do with anything, but we can answer the question.
You know, we've had a lot of legislation in the House of Representatives dealing exactly with that. It goes to the state Senate and hasn't been able to make it past the state Senate. And a few years ago, a bill passed both the House and the Senate, and Governor Freudenthal vetoed it. So in the House, at least, we're working on trying to get that passed. It's run into some roadblocks in the Senate and down in the governor's office.
Okay, well, so there you go. The House is trying to do something. So when we have a senator on, you can call and ask him. So let's take a short break. We'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about the report. And remember, if you do want the report, all 1,500 pages, it's available on the state auditor's website.
Department of Audit website, not state audit.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Once again, see, I knew I'd screw it up. But it's there for you if you want to read it. And I'll just say, I mean, the parts I've seen, there's some really, really strange stuff. So we'll take a break. We'll come back. News Talk 1270 KIML.
Broadcasting from two tall towers in the middle of a big field.
Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML. Call Don now, 682-1270. News Talk 1270 KIML.
News Talk 1270 KIML, Don Carpenter Show. Welcome back to the program. And if you're just joining us, in studio we have House Speaker Tom Lubnau. Welcome. And we started talking a little bit about the investigation and into the superintendent of public instruction. And you mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned this before we went to break or after, that you wanted to make sure that everybody understands that, I mean, this wasn't a personal vendetta. And I know, and I'm sure, Cindy Hill would rebut that, and I'm sure she'll be on at some point soon to rebut that. But you just wanted to make sure that everybody understands your side of the story and that it's not a personal thing.
No, it's a good government thing from our perspective. Like I say, 42 out of 60 members of the House of Representatives contacted me and said, we would like to follow up on this report because the allegations in this report, we can't just let lie. The best thing was an email that there was a whole bunch of email discussions, and there was discussions on whether we should do impeachment, whether we should do a follow-up on the investigation, and an email that I received on June 22nd from a representative from the southern part of the state. She said, "Dear colleagues," she said, "a robust discussion." She said, "Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your helpful presentation of the requirements for impeachment. It is impossible that impeachment is too blunt an instrument, but I think it important for us to follow up. I will summarize my thoughts into 4 brief points and then carry on below with some questions for attorneys or those with more experience with the state and feds and some comments for those who haven't made up their mind. If the allegations in the report are false or incorrect, we can investigate further, clarify the issue, and clear the superintendent of wrongdoing. or we can decline to follow up because we're sick of the whole thing and leave the superintendent under a cloud. If the allegations are correct, we can investigate further and take suitable action, impeachment, referral for charges, clarification that the allegations were correct but the issues have been resolved by Senate File 104, or we can decline to follow up and essentially tell state employees and the public that misuse of public funds is no big deal. I am sorry to say that some of the members of the public in the legislature seem to be suggesting a fifth point, which is that the allegations in the report are false, but that a legislative committee can't be trusted to draw that conclusion. I don't know how to answer that point. It seems to me we need to follow up on the report. To expand on the above and ask questions so that I can answer constituent questions, the main issues in the report are A, mismanagement, leadership, workplace, B, hiring practice, C, use of federal funds, and D, use of state funds. Regarding the first issue, I think we can all agree that being obnoxious and unlikable is not a cause for impeachment. Regarding the second, the report says on page 1 that the state's recruitment policy states that all reasonable efforts shall be made to attract suitable applicants. The chart of 10 positions shows that 8 out of 10 positions were only open to agency personnel, with an average length the positions were posted were 5 days. The other 2 were open to the public and open until filled. We can argue whether 5 days is reasonable, so as a former supervisor, I would consider this a gray area. It seems to me that the misuse of state and federal funds is one we should concentrate on. First, let's suppose that the employees' concerns are correct and the funds were misused. Initially, I was going to ask if misuse of state funds, i.e. charging expenses to inappropriate accounts, was against any statute, or it would be just read against standard procedure. But after developing my question, I read the State Auditor's 2012 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. It notes that the auditor's requirements to comply with generally accepted accounting principles as specified by, and it cites a statute, which indicate that certification of itemized accounts is done under the penalty of perjury. This led me to Wyoming Statute 65303B, where it's a felony to submit false vouchers with intent to defraud. We might discover that there was no intent, and so the 8 to 10 incidents totaling less than $2 million, I think it's hard to tell, resulted from sheer incompetence. That would remove the cause for impeachment, but it does strengthen the argument for Senate File 104 that an experienced administrator should be hired to run the department. If a regular state employee misused or deliberately miscoded funds 8 to 10 times over the course of 2 years, I assume their supervisor would counsel them, train them, mark them down in their evaluation, or put them on an improvement plan, and probably after many misdoings fire them. An at-will employee would have been let go after 3 or 4 of these occurrences. The superintendent has no supervisor other than the voters, who do not have access to the information on a timely basis, or the legislature. If we do not follow up on this report, are we saying that it is too much trouble to hold people accountable when they misuse or failure to supervise people who are misusing state and federal funds? There are a lot of state employees who live in my district. Should employees of the Wyoming Department of Transportation, Game and Fish, and the Health Department, given examples of departments with large, complex budgets, understand that we authorize their supervisors not to bother to monitor and correct the misuse of funds? I doubt that Superintendent Hill signed off on the voucher request herself, but she is responsible for the actions of her staff. Did she fail to supervise her team, or did she essentially authorize a heedless approach or a deliberate misuse of funds? If we compare this state situation to the current complaints about the federal IRS and the Attorney General, we must admit that leaving subordinates to take the heat for executive decisions just because it's too much trouble to follow up is an ugly option. On the other hand, if Superintendent Hill's position is correct, and the many of the Wyoming Department of Education employees who think that state and federal funds were misused are simply mistaken or lying, then there are many public reports alleging wrongdoing that need to be corrected. Are we saying that the legislature can't be bothered to gather a committee to set the record straight and clear her name? And so that was an email, and it was shortly after that email that the 42 members of the House of Representatives contacted me and said, we would like to do a follow-up investigation. So where we are in the process now is we've got a series of about 22 different allegations of misconduct. And we're investigating those to find out what the facts are, and then we're going to draw some conclusions. And this is purely an investigation to find the facts. Now, it could result in Superintendent Hill's name being cleared. It could result in recommendations for additional legislation. If it's really bad, it could result in one member, and any one member of the House can file articles of impeachment. It's up to that one member to file those articles. But right now, because the McPherson report didn't draw any conclusions, what we're trying to do is just dig down and find out what happened.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that maybe a lot of people don't really understand yet is nobody's actually made any, accusations have been made, but there haven't been any charges. There's no plan for impeachment at this point. You're just trying to sort out it's 1,500 pages. That's a lot of data to sort through.
Well, and to Superintendent, it's an investigation where the investigator talked to all of these employees and then asked Superintendent Hill questions, but asked her questions in a vacuum. And a lot of times in her response, she said, I don't remember, or this didn't happen. But we need to put things in context, and we need to take testimony, and Superintendent Hill needs the opportunity to ask clarifying questions so that we can get to the bottom of this and do it in a way that's fair and transparent to everybody involved.
Okay, and we have a couple calls here. I don't know. The one's been on hold for a few minutes, so I'm not sure if they're still there, but we'll give it a shot. We're almost out of time for the hour, so we might have to pick this up on the other side, but we'll give it a shot. News Talk 1270, you're on the air.
Good morning. Is, like the letter stated, Cindy Hill or whoever is the superintendent of instruction only answers to the voters. And so if there was something this tragic that should remove her power from her, is this only from Superintendent Hill, and after this the position will be returned to what it was before you guys took the power away from her?
Oh, that's a good question.
It is a good question. And the problem is that we've had problems in the Superintendent of Public Instruction's office for years. And if you look at the duties, most of the duties that were reorganized over to the Department of Education were duties that the legislature added to the Superintendent of Public Instruction's office since 1999. And so we've changed 104 different duties for the 104 different duties for the Superintendent of Public Instruction since 1999. We've added them, we've subtracted them, and until recently that hadn't been an issue. But the Department of Education wasn't working, and it hadn't been working for a long time. And I was on the Education Committee during the McBride administration and shared many of the same frustrations that the department wasn't giving information that the legislature needed, that all of the information that we were getting was being politicized, that the department wasn't following the law in terms of what the legislature had asked for to make legislative decisions. They weren't carrying out legislative directives, and they weren't spending the money, we thought, in a way that was appropriate. And so what we did is we left the policy-making decisions that the superintendent has traditionally had in the superintendent's office and just took away the ministerial duties that we've added, most of them, since 1999. So they were just removing duties that we've added traditionally to that office.
Oh, well, we're actually out of time for the hour. So how about I guess the important thing to remember is it's not personal. That's the important thing to remember.
No, Senate File 104 wasn't personal. And this investigation's just about good government. It's not about Superintendent Hill. It's about getting to the bottom of these allegations one way or another.
Okay, there you go. And like I said, we're completely out of time for the hour. So we're going to take a short break, and we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about this. We'll take a few more calls as well. Stay tuned, News Talk 1270 KIML.
For the latest on the show, follow Don on Twitter @TheDonCarpenter. News Talk 1270 KIML. Call Don right now, 682-1270.
News Talk 1270 KIML, Don Carpenter Show. And for our caller that just called in, hang on just a second. We'll get to you in just a second. And number looks familiar, so I think it might be a caller that called in just a minute ago. And we're speaking with Speaker Tom Lubnau, and we've been talking about the investigation into the superintendent of public instruction. And where we left off, we were talking about where the process is right now, and the investigation's over. Now the legislature is kind of going through all of that data. One of the things that the superintendent says, and some of the supporters have said when they called into the show, and I hate speaking for other people, but this is a pretty common question, is that all of these charges have been made and that the superintendent has been cleared every time. Would you like to address that?
Well, I don't know if the superintendent is guilty or not. I don't know if anybody's guilty or not. I don't know if there's mismanagement in the department. What I have is 1,500 pages of allegations. And so we've got 4 subcommittees looking in 4 different areas. We've got one that's looking in misuse of funds and studying the misuse of funds, and that's chaired by the Speaker Pro Tem, Tim Stubbson. We've got another committee looking into mismanagement of personnel, and that's the one where most of the stuff is confidential. That's chaired by the Minority Floor Leader, Mary Throne. We've got another committee that's looking into the Fremont 38 grant and expenditure of funds at Fremont 38, which is a situation where the state of Wyoming took over a school district. They went in, the Wyoming Department of Education imposed a curriculum and essentially took over a school district. And they had good results, but I will tell you that if you put one-on-one instruction with every student in a school and use the state funding to do it, where every child had their own personal teacher, you'd probably see results at any school that you went to. But the question is, should the state of Wyoming use federal grant funds to take over that school? Did they impose a curriculum in violation of the Constitution, which says neither the legislature nor the superintendent shall decide curriculum? And then the last one is just kind of a general catch-all, and that talks about misuse of the state airplane, or the legislature passed a law that said that you shall not run this course called Teacher to Teacher, which was essentially a program that taught reading literacy and Common Core standards. And the allegation is that the superintendent or her people changed the name of that program to the same program and ran the program teaching Common Core standards and this literacy under a name called Split. So it went from Teacher to Teacher to Split, and for special programs literacy, and then took federal grant funds dedicated to special education students and paid for the program because the legislature had prohibited use of state funds for that.
So, but it's important to remember that nothing has been decided on this. I mean, there's one way or the other. So,
well, and I'd urge for anybody who has questions about this, go online and read the reports. And the reason that we're doing an investigation as a legislature is we don't know the answer. The reports leave it up. They're a series of allegations one way and a series of allegations another way. No legal standards, and there are no conclusions. We believe in the legislature that everybody in the state is entitled to some conclusions. Right now we're gathering documents from all sorts of folks to support or to the areas that lead further questions have further questions. We're gathering those documents. As soon as we gather the documents, we'll talk to the people. This process will take some time. I was hoping it'd be done by the end of September. It doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Well, it is a lot of data.
Well, it's thousands of pages of information.
Yeah, so I don't know if our caller's still here, but we'll give it a shot. News Talk 1270, you're on the air.
Thank you for taking my call again.
Oh, yeah, and thanks for holding, by the way.
So the reason that we, the people, find it difficult to believe it's not personal is if there have been giving and taking away of delegation of duties since 1999 or whatever the date was, then we find that it should have been something, a legislative process that we all could have been involved in and voted on, or had some say in, and it should have been handled differently. If the duties aren't going to be returned to the position once Mrs. Hill is no longer in that position because we vote her out, not because of impeachment, then we would argue that the matter of government being too big is when the rights are taken away from the voters. And I guess that's about all that I have to say.
Oh, okay. Mr. Speaker, would you like to address that? And we do have another call. I'll get to you in a second. Just I won't let the speaker answer.
All right. Our government is a government of checks and balances. We have three branches of government because we have checks and balances. We have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, and we have the judicial branch. And when one branch of government oversteps its bounds, it's the obligation and the brilliance of our framers for the other branches of government to rein in those abuses or make sure that the system works. And this is an example of a constitutional crisis where one branch of government believes another branch of government wasn't fulfilling its functions and wasn't overstepping its duties. Now, people voted for the superintendent, but people also voted for the 90 members of the Wyoming legislature and the governor. There were 60 representatives. There were 30 senators. 20 senators voted for Senate File 104 as representatives of the people. And 39 representatives voted for Senate File 104 as representatives of the people, and the governor as representatives of the people signed that bill. And that's checks and balances, and that's your government at work. And no one elected official has absolute power. And if there are abuses going on, or perceived abuses, or the situation isn't working, or the legislature believes the law is not being followed, then that's the process. And this is a constitutional process, and this is democracy at work. This is tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and this is how it plays out. And the superintendent doesn't believe that the legislative branch acted properly. And so she's resorted to the judicial branch for interpretation of the legislature's actions. And that's the brilliance of our government, is that no one branch of government has absolute authority over anything, that it's a check and balances of power so that we don't have dictatorships, so that if the situation is untenable, we don't have to wait for 4 years for the next election to fix that process. It's one of the processes that I see as a problem in Washington, D.C. I believe the legislative branch is unwilling to stand up to the executive branch, the president, and say, no more. You're abusing your power. You've gone too far. This has to stop. And I wish that what was happening, this tension between branches of government that you see here and democracy playing out in front of everybody's very eyes, would play out in Washington, D.C., and it's not.
Yeah, so as dysfunctional as everything might seem, it's actually the system working the way it's supposed to work.
It's the brilliance of our founding fathers in not giving absolute power to any one branch of government and making sure that power of one elected official has checks and balances with other elected officials. And so the people who took the action in Senate File 104 were also representatives of the people. And they were representing all of the people in their individual districts. And they looked at the situation and they made the decision. And you hear that it was browbeaten or that people were denied committee appointments. That's just not true. Committee appointments were all made in November before Senate File 104 was even drafted or introduced. They're all the same. Committee chairmanships are all exactly the same before Senate File 104 and after Senate File 104. Some committee chairs voted for Senate File 104. Some committee chairs voted against Senate File 104. But all of those people have the same jobs. The Speaker has an ability to, if the Speaker wants, to not introduce or to just park an individual legislator's bill. Every representative who introduced a bill of any kind, whether whether they voted for or whether they voted against Senate File 104, every bill that every representative introduced was introduced by the Speaker, and every bill that could be heard in the time we had was heard, and none of the rankings were of bills. They were based on the individual merit of the bill and not on votes on Senate File 104. And if you look at the House bills that died in the Senate, about, I think it's half of the bills that were by people who voted for Senate File 104 died, and half of the bills that died in the Senate were people who voted against Senate File 104. So there's no correlation at all to any discipline because of any votes on Senate File 104. And it's illegal in Wyoming to trade votes, and it's illegal in Wyoming to trade bills. Every bill has to be on one subject, and so we go from one bill to the next bill. And so for those allegations to occur is just simply imagination.
Okay, and with that, let's take one more call. We do need to take one more break, and we'll kind of let you wrap up after that. But News Talk 1270, you're on the air.
Yes, two issues. First of all, was the McPherson investigation and report incomplete? Was it failed? I mean, it seems like we had an investigation conducted, a 1,500-page report generated. I assume she's a lawyer. Nobody else could write that much. But was the investigation not completed? Were the guidelines for the investigation not fulfilled? And then my other question is, do we need to be discussing this in terms of a constitutional amendment to do away with the office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction? Is it outdated? Is it outmoded? Is it something we don't even need anymore? I do believe, although I did not vote for Ms. Hill, but I do have problems when we start going around constitutionally provided for and elected offices and taking their control away from them and so forth. But maybe it's no longer a needed office. I don't know, and I'd like to have comments on that. And just Mr. Lubnau, if you could keep it succinct and to this point. We all know what goes on in Washington, D.C. and what the problems are there, but this is a different discussion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the question. We do have a couple more calls. What we'll do is we'll just go straight through the bottom of the hour. That way we can get everybody in. But before we get to the other callers, guys, just hold on. What do you have to say about those questions?
I was disappointed in the report. It didn't provide any conclusions. It just provided lists of allegations, lists of what people thought, and no backup to anything. So the McPherson report I thought was incomplete. That was an executive branch decision and an executive branch mandate out of the governor's office. And I didn't know the contents of the report, what the report was going to say, until it was released at the end of June when everybody else did that. So I agree that the report was incomplete, and I'm disappointed because I would rather do a million other things than have to be involved in an investigation following up on this information. With respect to the constitutional amendment, I believe that the Superintendent of Public Instruction has valid and an important function, and that the valid and important functions that the Superintendent of Public Instruction had before Senate File 104 she still has. Those are the policy-making decisions, the recommendations as to policy, the votes on the board, the participation in the State Board of Education with such educational standards. I believe that should be an elected position with the duties that position has. Now, with respect to the Constitution and the constitutional duties, I think it's important that everybody know what Article 7, Section 14 of our Constitution says, which says the superintendent shall have general supervision of the schools and shall have such duties as shall be prescribed by law. Well, who prescribes the duties by law? It's the legislature. So our Constitution provides for the amendment of those duties, and we've been amending them historically since 1919, and then again in 1958. And then I had a call from one of the one of the nice people who's lived here for a long, long time, who was in school in the 60s, who said we had these same issues in the 60s, which resulted in a reorganization and the creation of the Department of Education completely in 1969, because we didn't have a Department of Education until then. So this position has had duties evolving since the beginning of statehood. And there have been major reorganizations all the way along, particularly in the 20s, the 50s, the 60s, and now in 2013.
And I guess the Constitution allows for that kind of growth and evolution as well.
Well, that's the issue in front of the Wyoming Supreme Court right now, is did the legislature act constitutionally in passing Senate File 104, or is the superintendent's interpretation of the Constitution correct? And we'll just have to wait and see what the Supreme Court says on that.
Okay, and we still have a few calls, so hopefully they're still with us. Okay, that one, I guess they couldn't wait. That one couldn't wait. News Talk 1270, you're on the air.
Mr. Speaker, not to change the topic too severely, but noticed in today's trip in Casper that we're over $2 billion short on the pension. And I know last year Brian Peterson had submitted a bill in committee that never escaped committee, asking that we stop using a defined benefit program and switch to defined contributions so we could keep our promise to our current pension employees and not saddle our children with debt. Could you comment on whether you'd support that or not?
Okay, sorry. We were actually going to talk about that, so you're not changing the topic too bad. It's a welcome change.
I was a co-sponsor with Brian Pedersen with that bill, and I supported that, and I argued for it on the floor, and I argued for its introduction. It died in committee, just as you said. We made some minor adjustments, changing the contribution rate for state employees and also changing the contribution rate for the state of Wyoming. There were some assumptions, and it's interesting how economists can make assumptions and change the picture 180 degrees. When we were debating the defined contribution plan versus the defined benefit plan, the assumptions made it look like the plan was 84% funded, but they were assuming an 8% rate of return. Well, anybody who knows the market today knows that we're not getting consistent 8% rates of return, and so they changed the assumptions. Well, when they changed the assumptions, of course, all of a sudden, lo and behold, it's what Brian Pedersen said. Your assumptions are wrong. You're really about 74% funded, and we're about $1.2 billion underfunded in the state of Wyoming's pension plan. It doesn't look like there are the votes there to get a defined benefit or a defined contribution plan passed, but there appear to be the votes to adjust the contribution rate so that the state employees contribute a little bit more and the state of Wyoming contributes a little bit more as employers to bring that plan back into being actuarially funded. Because right now they say that plans that are 80% or more funded can survive. Plans that are less than 80% funded, if you don't do something about them right away, fall into a death spiral, and then you end up with problems like they have in Illinois, where, what are they, $125 billion underfunded. So it's something we'll adjust. We've got an eye on it. We study that every year since, which is why Pedersen brought it up a couple years ago when he's in the legislature. Brian's no longer in the legislature. He had intended to run for state treasurer, but due to some constitutional limitations, you can't be appointed to an office once you're serving in the term in the legislature. So nobody in the legislature who's in their term can be appointed until after their term is over. They've appointed Mark Gordon, who's doing a marvelous job as state treasurer now. So
there is something in the works then that'll kind of get things close to being at least close to being balanced.
It's not the result that I would like, which is changing the plan from a defined benefit plan to a defined contribution plan, but it's something that we're taking steps so that we're not underfunded.
Okay, and we'll take one more call. I do know you need to get out of here, so we'll have to keep it short, but we'll take one more call. News Talk 1270, you're on the air. You still with us? Okay. Okay. Yeah. I guess we lost your call. I know you have a problem keeping a signal. It was one of our regular callers. So, I guess. Well, we have a couple minutes. So, I mean, is there anything you want to say in closing to kind of wrap things up?
If you have problems or concerns with what your legislator is doing, send us an email or call us. We're all available. If you go to the legislative website, all of our contact information is there. We're fortunate to have a great legislative team. Senators Driscoll and Hines and von Flatern do a marvelous job in the Senate. Representatives Wallace, Kasparek, Blickery, Barlow, and I work together as a team very well. And the Campbell County delegation has surprisingly a lot of seniority in working up through the process. You've got Representative Kasparek, who's the Vice Chairman of the Minerals Business and Economic Development Committee. You've got Representative Wallace, who's the Vice Chairman of the Appropriations Committee. You've got Representative Blickery, who's the Vice Chairman of the Corporations Committee, three of the most powerful committees in the legislature. And they're slated to become more and more senior as things change in the legislature. So you've got a very powerful legislative delegation. Representative Barlow has really hit the ground running. He works very, very hard to become fully informed on the issues. And I'm really proud to work with a team that we have representing the people of Campbell County. And we work together as a team to get that done.
Yeah, and I think that's important to remember. And if anybody does have questions, just find out who your local representative is. Feel free to give them a call and ask some questions. I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you.
Oh, we talk to people all the time, and we talk to people from all over the state. When they send us emails, you'll see replies from everybody all over the state. I try to focus in my particular area of expertise, which is minerals, particularly the oil and gas and coal industry. Those are the industries where I spend most of my time doing everything I can to protect those industries and to protect the jobs that they bring. Those tasks don't seem to make a lot of news coverage, but that's where I like to spend and where I do spend the bulk of my time. These other issues are distractions from that. I wish I didn't have to spend my time dealing sometimes with the other issues, but they're sometimes burdens to leadership that you don't necessarily want but have by virtue of the job.
Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good note to end on. I'll let you go. I know you have to get to a meeting. I want to thank Speaker Tom Lubnau for coming in, and hopefully we'll get to see you again soon.
Well, thank you very much, Don, for having me.
And with that, we'll take a short break. News Talk 1270 KIML.
From Washington to Cheyenne to right here in Gillette, Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML.